So I have a few topics I'd like to discuss at the moment, based on a few comments that have been left on a couple of videos, a few videos that are kind of interconnected. So hopefully I'll be able to remember where I'm going with this, because it's rather complex. The first one I want to start off with is the concept of duality versus the concept of dualism. The video that sparked off this conversation is the one about good and evil, and how there is a difference between the two, and that this reality that we exist in is a reality based on duality. That does not mean that it is based on dualism. They're two different things. So duality, now this definition is kind of weak, but duality, the condition or quality of being dual, and an instance of opposition or contrast between two concepts, two aspects of something, and they call this a dualism. But also similar words or synonyms would be polarity, separation, opposition, or contrast, or difference. And so what duality is the difference in identifying one thing as being separate from another. And yet dualism is classified as a religion by the Encyclopedia Britannica. In religion, the doctrine that the world or reality consists of two basic, opposed, and irreducible principles that account for all that exists. It has played an important role in history of thought and religion. In religion, dualism means the belief in two supreme opposed powers or gods, or sets of divine or demonic beings that cause the world to exist. It may conveniently be contrasted with monism, which sees the world as consisting of one principle, such as mind, spirit, or matter, with monotheism, or with various pluralisms or polytheisms, which see a multiplicity of principles or powers at work. As is indicated below, however, the situation is not always clear and simple, a matter of one or two or many, for there are monotheistic, monistic, and polytheistic religions with dualistic aspects. So this is why I think it's important to draw the distinction between dualistic or duality and dualism. Dualism is a belief in the two opposing powers or the two opposing gods, or of ultimate supreme good and evil battling it out type of thing. Whereas you can have monotheistic or polytheistic religions with dualistic aspects. So there has to be a distinction made between these two properties or these two words, because what's happening is a form of reductionism with this concept of we are all one, that is being pushed, primarily being pushed by the New Age, and telling us that we are all one and we must go back to one and operate as one.
Right, you see the 0, 1 and the 0, 2, this is important. 0 and 1 and 1 and 2 are actually the same exact thing. The only difference is 0 and 1 is not conscious and the 1 and 2 is conscious. Because I have a saying that I made up that I really like, and that's there is no such thing as 1, there's only 0 and 2, because consciousness by default is a duality state, is a binary state. So when you have these people telling you to go to oneness, get rid of your ego and all that stuff, that's fucking bullshit. Because the core of all of that is consciousness, And that is a binary phenomenon. So there's no getting around that. So there is no such thing as that. So what they say when they go to 1, the only thing they could mean is they go to 0, but 0 is oblivion and it's not conscious. So you basically, it's an absence of consciousness in that state of 0. So that's what that is. So the 0 and 1, the 1 and 2 is 0 and 1 just with consciousness. And the 0 and 1 is unknowable to that point because that's the way it goes. So when 0 becomes 1, and what was 1 becomes alive with consciousness, and that becomes a 2. And that's how that works.
All of these numbers and these planets and these archetypes, they are all interrelated. And as Plato said, all is made by the power of number. Numbers, all the gods, all the archetypes are numerical, sacred, geometrical forms and conditions of the one everlasting unconditioned. The everlasting unconditioned, the infinite of infinites, is always producing infinites from its infinite, power source. And so they are, this is why there's so much confusion in theology, but it's simple. It's so simple. You either you either see the God as a unit, which it is. That's the supreme principle and archetype, and then you see it in its diffusions as the demigod, the mind god, because mind is a condition. As Plato said, mind is it's the root of division in the universe, mind. So you've got this 1 and you've got this 2. 1 is being, atum, and 2 is mind, which is the firstborn of being, the Son of God. And this is virtually the only, and all the names of gods come from that one, from the second God, from mind God, conditioned God, the creator, the demiurgos, creator of solar systems, creator of everything that is molded and formed, the potters of Memphis, the archons, the Elohim, and they all descend from this supreme being archetype, you see. And so, but the confusion there is in the names of the dualistic part of reality. You see, Plato called it duality in unity. That's what's going on. And so it's very, very simple. All the philosophers, all the theologians, mystics, all of them spoke of this 1 and 2 phenomena,
What a lot of people are doing is reducing all of existence to the one, which essentially disintegrates the meaning and the significance of the existence of this reality to nothing. And you can see that this is not nothing. So that is nihilism. And by reducing everything to this meaningless existence, then there is no culpability for your actions. There's no consequences for your actions. Your life is meaningless. Your existence is meaningless. There's no purpose for you here. It's just all in your head, imagination, doesn't matter. Do as you wish. It really doesn't matter. Now, what I have come to rest on is that we are in a shared co-created reality with other beings within the mind of the demiurge. So the hardened reality, the three-dimensional reality, is something that is created by the mind of the demiurge, the collective, contributed to by the collective gods of the universe, being the planets and the stars. And we come from the stars. I know it sounds ridiculous, I do. But we come from the stars, which is why we are tied to the zodiac. Everything is tied to the zodiac. And this constitutes our personality, our soul. This is how we are created on this earthly plane. And we, as an individual here, we are individual and connected to the whole.
as I said, everything is God's that goes back to the one God. And that's basically the root of existence. This God, this eternal good. As the Neoplatonists said, they are one and the same, interchangeable. And so, and Saturn is the prototype of all of them. He is the chief supreme prototype in the physical world. Everything beyond the physical world he has no dominion over, and that is in the realm of his father Uranus. Uranus means the heavens, and Uranus is the ruler of the eighth sphere. Saturn is, of course, the Shiva, the seventh. He is the seventh Sabbath planet. Saturn day, the Sabbath. Sunday is the first day. But they're always together, you see, on the weekends, Saturn and Sun, Saturn day and Sunday. Mm-hmm. This is very peculiar with these two brothers, these two twins, Horus and Set, sunrise and sunset. One is daylight, one is darkness, one is direct energy, one is reflected energy, see. But the fact is this, that Saturn's light is that ultraviolet. It's that violet light. That's the light of Saturn. That's the true light of Saturn on the evolutionary arc of our our spiritual evolution. But on the involution arc, Saturn's light is the red light, and so he gives us a vice rather than a virtue. But what we have to do. See, souls descending through Saturn's rings receive the vestments of those planets. You see, Saturn gives you prudence, Jupiter reason and rationale, Mars will, the Sun divine will, Venus gives you sensual nature and love.
So if you root back to the origin of creation, let's say, you start with the zero or the source of all things, and in recognizing its own existence by looking at its reflection, which is acknowledging its existence, which is coming to awareness or consciousness, it creates the opposite of what it is. It is a pure reflection of self. That is duality right there. It is the separation. The duality is created immediately. And there cannot be any existence of anything if we are all zero, if we all go back to source and we all root back as all one. Because there is no, as Lord Osiron says, there is no singularity that a conscious mind can conceive of. Everything is duality.
This is only a 2D representation of a 3D cube, okay? And because of that, in the 2D form, you can, in these face triangle things, you can't tell what plane of the cube this triangle belongs to, because it could either be the upper one or the side one. So it takes two triangles to isolate the exact plane that you're dealing with. So for instance, you got the one here, you can't tell if it's up or down, but when you add one more to it, you can. So for instance, this 1 and 2 tells you that this is the top, the top plane, and the 1 and 3 is the lower rear plane. So now it takes two to isolate it, and this is important, this theme of duality. Everything is duality. There is no such thing as singularity that any conscious mind can be aware of.
Now, a lot of people will say that dualism is Abrahamic, and it is. Absolutely. Abrahamic religions, and that includes atheism. This basically is a religion based on good versus evil, ultimately. That we're on the side of the good side, and the other side's got to die. And so it's all about destroying the opposite. Now, in that video, the reason I posted that video, and rather than me repeating everything she said and having to give her credit, which would have taken a lot more time, I thought it was best if I just share her video. Now, the reason that I liked it was because ultimately, she is saying that good and evil do exist, and you cannot just philosophically talk them away. And by not standing up for justice, not standing up against injustice, you're allowing the injustice to happen. And to say that there is no right and wrong, there is no evil or good, is nonsense. And what has happened here in this reality that we live in is that we've allowed the evil to take over by doing nothing.
Love and evolution are the same word. Love backwards is evolution. So evil also comes from Eve. Eve is even numbers. That's all it is. All the gods are numbers. It's all numbers. The world is number. So Eve is the number 2, even, and Adam is odd numbers. The number 1, atom, means one. Atum, one unit. Adam, right? So Adam and even. So you've got the number 1, unity, and you've got the number 2, duality. Adam and Eve. Eve, see, the number 2 is funny kind of a, it's the most loved and hated number of all the numbers, bar none. It has more polarity than any other number, simply because between 1 and infinity, it's the only place where doubling occurs. Never again is there doubling. So Eve, she's the multiplier. She's the mother of all her children in the universe. She is the mother because it's 2. It multiplies. But when Adam was alone, he was happy. Then even comes along and stuffs it all up and everything is divided. Because, see, 2, in its positive aspect, is the multiplier. But, on the other hand, in its negative, it's the divider. 2 divides. All even numbers are divisible, right? So 4, 2 and 2. 6, 3 and 3. Whereas the masculine numbers, 1, odd numbers, Adam, they are unifying. They don't divide. They bring things into unity. 3 is a sacred trinity, brings unity to the world. 1 is the extreme example of unity.
So I just wanted to clarify some of the confusion that might be caused by what is being said here, because Santos and Lord Osiron are essentially saying the same thing. They're just using different numbers. Now, Santos said that 1 is unity, but actually 0 is the unity. And 0 is the source of all things, not 1. What he means is the state of 0 and 1, which is what Lord Osiron refers to as the state of unconsciousness or being. And so when Santos says that mind is the divider, mind is the 1, the number 1. Mind is the point at which things separate. So he's saying the same thing, he's just using different numbers. And then he says that 2 is the mind. Well, 2 is the state of consciousness or awareness that Lord Osiron is referring to in the state of 1 and 2. And so he is saying the same thing. The state of 1 and 2 is the divider, is the mind state. So it's the state of 1 and 2 is the point of all creation, is the demiurge. It is the what he calls a conditional consciousness. So the state of 0 and 1 is unconditional unconsciousness, state of being in nothingness. I also disagree that 1 is unity. I think 0 is unity. And 2 would be harmony. So the even numbers would be harmony and an evening, a balancing, whereas the odd numbers create an imbalance and a disharmony because of the odd number, the odd imbalance of the third or the fifth or the odd number, which is necessary in creating movement and change. Otherwise, everything would be stagnation. Basically, it's just how you look at it. I think it has more to do with perspective.
From the Hopis to the Egyptians, the Aztecs, the Mayas, the Incas, the ancient Greeks with Hercules and his 2 pillars, Samson and the 2 pillars, churches on tops of many of them. Their 2 steeples will be different. One will depict the sun, one in the moon. In many cathedrals, you will have 2 pillars with an archway entering through the center. Through many Freemasonic pictures and drawings, you will see 2 pillars in a stairway, or a ladder, or a tree, the tree of life depicted. Is what they are saying that 2 pillars, when placed correctly, can create the 3rd invisible pillar in the center. It even goes back to mysticism and tarot card readings, even church tapestries. Wicca also talks of the 2 pillars of life. It's found everywhere throughout history. Now we're going to take a look at the magnetic field of the Earth and the clover shape it creates in the center. It forms a 4-leaf clover pattern around the North Pole. The tides appear to follow the lines of magnetic force and not the moon. And here is what happens when we put 2 pillars under a pharaoh cell. You get a clover-looking pattern. So, did the ancients know then much more than we know now? Are Rakim and Bolas more than just a fairy tale? This is Good Times for All here, signing out.
Look closely. Pay attention. Pay attention. If you actually look, the supercell is so sensitive. Look. No one's ever seen this before, and it's never been in any video. You see this toroid right here? Look. Starting top right here, the bottom right here, you can see how at the bottom it lips around. You see that?
You see the blue above and the red below. Red always depicts infernal, hellish realms, and blue is always sky, heaven, God-like, and sort of more to do with a consciousness and I guess the spiritual nature of things, whereas red is usually depicting physical, the physical material world. Please keep this graphic in mind because this one is very, very, very telling. And notice the Taurus field in the center of these 2 domes. Yeah, this is how it truly is. It has to be like this, as you will see in a minute. Taurus fields, you see, because the original word for the bull was apis, and apis is the root of Apollo, the apples of Apollo, and so, and this is what an apple is. It's a bull. It's a Taurus field. You see the core of the apple, the heart of the apple, the heart of the tree, the heart of the human being. It's the core, the cardiac, the heart, the Taurus. And so this word apis, apple, Apollo, arbor. You see, this is why a tree is an arbor. Well, that arbor is really just an anagram for abra.
So this is the work of Walter Russell. This is the spectrum of light, and these are the polarities of color on that spectrum of light as fragmented through a prism. This is a spectrum of white light. So these are white on both sides, and then this breakdown in the middle here in between. And so he describes it as octave waves of vibrating light, which constitute the elements of matter, consist of 4 pairs of tones. So right here, 4 pairs of tones. He explains that all matter is consisted of pairs, and I'll get to that later. But that as well shows the duality and the dual nature of reality. So it consists of 4 pairs of tones centered by a 0 of rest, which controls their balance from within, and are bounded by 2 0 poles of rest, which control it from without. On this side you got the positive, which is the red shift, and the blue shift is the negative. And so he's got yellow in the middle, and on both sides of the white, which is the 0 and the 9, and the 0 and the 9 are the counterspace, and in the middle is the plane of inertia. So the plane of inertia is in the center, which is a 0 of rest. So in the middle there's a rest point. Now Lord Osiron refers to that as the plane of inertia and counterspace. So I think when you're looking at this in terms of a cube, it takes on a different form than this being a spectrum.
What this complements is the work of Walter Russell. This is sort of why I'm mentioning this, because the foundation of Walter Russell's work is the cube sphere model of cosmology. And one of the things that he says is that light doesn't move, light only reflects. So basically the idea of light moving is just an illusion. In his model is that light doesn't reflect. Light doesn't move, it only reflects. And what we're seeing this here with this cube model, this is like the starting number in this case is a 10. It goes back, cycles through, comes back to 19, which is just a 1 reflecting itself. All the corners are a reflection of themselves when they reduce to the same number that ends up being in here. See, it doesn't reflect the same number it starts with. See, so right now it's a 10, which is a 1. So these corners don't add up to 1. It only reflects what it is when it comes back to itself. So it starts out with a 10, which becomes a 1, goes through its cycle, comes back as 19, which is another 1, which is a reflection of the initial 1, and then the corners corroborate that with the reduction in becoming 2. And if it was a 3, say you put a 3 here, what would happen? It starts out with 3, goes to its cycle, comes back another 3, which is a 6, and the corners in that case would produce a 6. Every corner would produce a 6. So it's a complete circuit into of itself, and it only works when it's a complete circuit. If you align this with the proper gender assignment, you know what I mean, like the middle being neutral and feminine and masculine, and you keep the same parameter when you construct it, it builds it the same way. And that when you do that, it reveals its magic in that way. But if you just constructed it using cubes without this 2D template, it would be very easy to mess up, and you wouldn't necessarily figure it out.
So this is his diagram on wave geometry, which looks like a pyramid. And here's the cube, and then within the cube is the pyramid. And he's got this hyperbola, which is the funnel within the toroid. And so what he's saying here is gravity divides the white light of the mind of the God mind into pairs of sexed spectrum mates. So Lord Osiron talks about this.
When you take the multiples of 9 of the 9's tables, it shows the forward and backward nature of reality in the numbers, okay? So what happens is you have 0, 9, and if you go out 10 spaces, it goes 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, 54, 63, 72, 81, and back to 90. This is a perfect symmetrical mirror of itself, okay? And what happens is you got 0, 9, and the first number after that is 18, which is just a 1 and an 8, which is the alpha and the omega, you could say, or the beginning and the complete end. And it just goes through its perfect symmetry. So it starts out with the 18, which is the beginning, a 1, and the 8 is the end, and then when it's finished, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then it's the complete reverse of 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and it's a complete, perfect mirror of itself.
Gravity then multiplies their power. So I don't know what he means by gravity. What I assume, or what I'm guessing that he means by gravity, is magnetism, or it could be dielectric magnetic energy.
The 0, here's a cube. The cube is made up of the 8 digits, and then the center point of this cube is the 0 and 9 space, okay? And that space I'm postulating is the same exact thing as counterspace. Now you're probably saying, what the fuck is counterspace? Counterspace is this aspect, like if you take a magnet, okay, and this came from that video last night I watched, it was really good. But if you take a magnet, you have a north pole and a south pole, and in the center of that is the plane of inertia, and that's the center of the magnet. But that's not a part of the physical properties of the magnet. That is just a aspect of the field perturbations taking place with the aspect of what we call magnetism. Okay, because if you break that magnet in half, you will have two magnets, and you won't have one north aspect and one south aspect. It'll shift to become two magnets. Just like if you take two magnets and join them together, the north and south pole, when they get together, that will become one magnet again. So the plane of inertia in the middle is counterspace. It's the same thing as counterspace. So, what that means is, you can see this in a cube. Like right now, the center point of the cube is the 0,9 space in the perfect center of this cube. It didn't start out there, okay? So what happens is you take the 1, now the 1, the center of mass and the center of gravity are the same point in the center of the object. But now when you add two objects together, it changes. So now the center position between the 1 and the 2 is in between the 1 and the 2, and they'll move together to reconcile that. But they're not moving towards each other, they're both moving towards counterspace, according to Kant. Okay, so now when you add the 3 to this, it shifts the whole dynamic. Now the center point moves somewhere between the middle of all these. When you add the 4, it moves again to the center of this. When you add the 5, it moves to the center of that. Same thing when you add the 6, it moves again to the center of all of them. When you add the 7, same thing, it moves again. And then when you add the 8, the final 8, it equalizes to form its exact center point. Okay, so the center point isn't really there, it's a result of the workings of all these other aspects together. And that's the 0 and 9 point.
Here you've got red shift, blue shift. This is expansion, compression. This is the wave, the duality wave. You have this opposing force of expansion and compression. That's what you get in the sine wave. The sine wave is compression and expansion, compression and expansion. And so everything behaves this way. So the double-slit experiment is very popular, well-known experiment that claims to prove the existence of the duality or the dual nature of reality, that everything is both a wave and a particle, and it only collapses into a particle upon observation. This is false. Everything is a wave, and it's not even a wave, it's a perturbation of the field. So anyway, this is the original double-slit experiment. This is how it was originally conducted before there were lasers and cartoons, and this will show you what actually took place.
There's one in the middle strongest, 2 either side.
And the 2 on the outside are multicolored, and the one in the middle is just white.
And kind of a rainbow?
The rainbow of colour as well.
Quite a few colours and lots of little dots.
Like there are more dots appearing.
I think I can even see more dots spreading along. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I can see tons of dots now. Not tons, but I can see dots spreading across that way.
Either side.
Yeah, definitely.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's just nothing else apart from
2 slits.
2 slits.
People were debating, is light a wave or is it made of particles?
So what causes that?
Well, if light were behaving as particles, you would expect them to go through each slit and just produce a bright spot underneath. So we would see 2 bright spots on the bottom of the box. But if light's behaving as waves, then the wave from one slit can interact with the waves from the other slit. I've got a demonstration here on a little pond where we can see this with water waves. I have 2 sources of ripples, which are basically like the 2 slits. When I create ripples with a single source, they travel out with circular wavefronts. Nothing particularly surprising there. But if I add a second source of ripples, then we start getting an interesting pattern. This pattern is created by the ripples from the two sources interacting with each other. Where they meet up, peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, the amplitude of the wave is increased. That's what we call constructive interference. But if the peak from one wave meets up with the trough from the other, then we get destructive interference and there's basically no wave there. And this is exactly what was happening with the light. When the light from one slit met up, peaks with peaks and troughs with troughs, they constructively interfered and produced a bright spot. But if the trough from the wave from one slit met up with the peak of the wave from the other slit, they would destructively interfere and you wouldn't see any light there. It's light canceling itself out. Now there's a slight complication, which is that sunlight is composed of many different colors and they have different wavelengths. So obviously they're going to meet up at slightly different points. And that's what caused the rainbowing effects as we go further from the central maximum. You saw the ones to the right were slightly colored.
Yeah,
that's
it's
because
burgundy.
the reds are going to meet up at different places than the blues.
And that's all that makes the colour differences, is different wavelengths.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
And this is what mainstream scientists are claiming that the double slit experiment proves. All the actual experiments prove what this one proves, that it does not change with observation, that the experiment ends at the light passing through the two slits and the two causing an interference pattern. So let's just show what this claims is happening.
When we throw things, that is, matter, through two slits, we get this, two bands of hits. And with waves, we get an interference pattern of many bands. Good so far. Now, let's go quantum. An electron is a tiny, tiny bit of matter, like a tiny marble. Let's fire a stream through one slit. It behaves just like the marble, a single band. So, if we shoot these tiny bits through two slits, we should get, like the marbles, two bands. What? An interference pattern. We fired electrons, tiny bits of matter through. We get a pattern like waves, not like little marbles. How? How could pieces of matter create an interference pattern like a wave? It doesn't make sense. But physicists are clever. They thought, maybe those little balls are bouncing off each other and creating that pattern. So they decide to shoot electrons through one at a time. There is no way they could interfere with each other. But after an hour of this, the same interference pattern is seen to emerge. The conclusion is inescapable. The single electron leaves as a particle, becomes a wave of potentials, goes through both slits, and interferes with itself to hit the wall like a particle. But mathematically, it's even stranger. It goes through both slits and it goes through neither. And it goes through just one and it goes through just the other. All of these possibilities are in superposition with each other. But physicists were completely baffled by this. So they decided to peek and see which slit it actually goes through. They put a measuring device by one slit to see which one it went through and let it fly. But the quantum world is far more mysterious than they could have imagined. When they observed, the electron went back to behaving like a little marble. It produced a pattern of two bands, not an interference pattern of many. The very act of measuring or observing which slit it went through meant it only went through one, not both.
So what they're claiming is that measuring or observing changes the behavior of the electron. Now, where things went off the rails with this experiment, or this video in particular, is when the moment he said, now let's go quantum. This is when he started to lie. And basically, first of all, an electron does not exist.
Nikola Tesla, Oliver Heaviside, James Clerk Maxwell, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, a little hunched over guy, who later became hardcore friends with Thomas Edison, ironically, since Charles Proteus Steinmetz really perfected the systems of Nikola Tesla. What did all these people have in common, and what was the one thing that they said was wrong? Now, J.J. Thomson supposedly discovered the electron. However, it was the case that only when fame and much money and acclamation was weighed upon him did he eventually concede, was forced to basically admit forward the premise that the electron was a particle. Well, that's not the case. Oliver Heaviside said that this was a quote-unquote psychosis of current human understanding. It is the case that quantum, i.e. quantity, i.e. atomism, a very, very ancient premise that even predates the ancient Greeks, atomism, and of course Democritus revived it, that Einstein and his ilk of quantum buffoons have set back understanding of cosmic mechanics at least 100 years in our current supposed modern-day world. What is the case that there is no such thing as an electron?
What this experiment is claiming is that they took an electron, which is a subatomic particle, and they do not explain how they did this, because they can't do this. You cannot take a subatomic particle. First of all, they don't exist. Second, you cannot break down an atom into particles, so it's not possible. Now, even if they could do this, atoms are so small, you're never ever going to see it, so there's no way that you could do it. It's not possible. So the next thing they say is that they shot these particles, these electrons, through the slits, and they did so together and individually, and they behaved like a wave. Now, this experiment was never conducted because it's impossible to do. They couldn't have done it. So the only reason that they get away with it is because they use cartoons to illustrate or demonstrate what they claim is actually happening, but it's not happening. Now, the next thing that they say is that because of this behavior, there's something called superposition, which means that they both exist in a point of potentiality in physical reality, which is not possible. Once something is manifest, it is what it is. It can change form through manufactured means, but it is not in a state of superposition where it is two things at once. It is not simultaneously dead or alive, which is what Schrodinger's cat experiment claims happens with this theoretical cat. That's also an impossibility, which I'll get to later. But what they're claiming is that this electron simultaneously exists and doesn't exist, or is both a wave and a particle, so it's not possible. And it is only upon observation or measurement that it actually collapses into a particle, which it does not do, because all of this is just made up nonsense. It does not happen in reality. Now, basically what double-slit experiment seems to me to be is the setup for Schrodinger's cat, which is the setup for this quantum physics bullshit, which is the setup for simulation theory. That's what all of this is. And the big red flag is that this stems from Albert Einstein, and this Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment, which means that it was never actually conducted in physical reality. It was a thought experiment, which is basically a conundrum. It is a hypothetical, philosophical debate over whether it's actually possible or not, and it's not, because you can't actually conduct this experiment in physical reality. So it's nonsense. Now, this thought experiment, sometimes described as a paradox, was devised by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, though the idea originated from Albert Einstein. It illustrates what he saw as the problem of the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics applied to everyday objects. So the scenario presents a hypothetical cat, not a real cat. It's a hypothetical cat that may be simultaneously both dead and alive. May be. simultaneously dead and alive. Not actually simultaneously dead and alive, because that's an impossibility. Cannot be in two states at once. A state known as quantum superposition, which was set up by the double-slit experiment as a result of being linked to a random subatomic, which has to do with potentially the, again, double-slit experiment in using the electron, which is simultaneously a wave and a particle, which is nonsense because of what all I've already said. Subatomic event that may or may not occur. Again, may or may not. Now, all the rest of this is irrelevant. I'm not going to read it, but basically this is what the experiment was. Schrodinger's cat, a flask of poison, and a radioactive source are placed in a sealed box. It sounds like a setup for a joke. If an internal monitor, like a Geiger counter, detects radioactivity, a single atom decaying, I guess that would be the subatomic event, which doesn't happen, the flask is shattered, releasing the poison which kills the cat. And so at which point then the cat would be dead. So this whole experiment is just utter nonsense. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics implies that after a while the cat is simultaneously alive and dead. Well, no, it's not. At one point it's alive, and if you leave it in the box long enough, it will die. If you don't feed it, you don't give it water, you don't let it out of the box and give it sunlight, it will eventually die. Yet when one looks in the box, one sees the cat is either dead or alive, not both alive and dead. This poses the question of when exactly quantum superposition ends and reality collapses into one possibility or the other. The only place that the cat is either alive or dead is in your head. That is the only place that it is alive or dead at the same time. It is only once you open the box and take a look at it do you confirm whether it is actually alive or dead in reality. It does not change the physical state of the cat. The cat is either alive or dead. You just don't know it until you look at it. That's all this experiment is talking about, and they're making it into some sort of quantum mechanical superposition bullshit. It's just utter nonsense thought experiment that has never taken place. They cannot prove it. They never will prove it because it is unprovable. It is not part of the physical reality. It's an impossibility. So, this person has claimed to have done this experiment using flies. Let's see what he has to say.
In this experiment, basically what we had is 3 different things that we could count as measurement. We could say that the flies themselves were measuring themselves. Every moment the flies knew that they were not dead, that means that there were not 3 decays within 1 second. So basically just the fact that these flies are conscious and able to know whether they're dead or alive, that means that they were continually taking a measurement throughout the whole experiment. So they were never actually in a superposition. But if you don't think that the flies are actually conscious enough to know that, then maybe you could take it to mean that the Geiger counter is actually what the measurement is. So when the Geiger counter was able to actually sense whether it was getting to 3 or 2 or 1 within 1 second, that was the measurement. So every second that the Geiger counter did not get to 3, that was a measurement. And so the flies were not in a state of superposition because this was always measuring it and it never got to 3. But I don't know any of that actually happened until I actually checked on my experiment. So you could say that the measurement was not actually complete until I actually looked at it and saw the results of the experiment. Well, unfortunately, there's no answer to this question. The mathematics of quantum mechanics is such that you can call any one of these points a measurement, and you can never know which one the measurement was because in order to check it, you have to check on the experiment yourself.
So he's just basically talked himself in a circle to say that this experiment is not something that you can perform. That's exactly what he said. So, it makes me angry because people believe this stuff. I believed this stuff. Not Schrodinger's cat, but I believed the double-slit experiment was legitimate. And now I understand that they always use computer-generated images to demonstrate things that are not true. And then they just add fancy words to make you think that this is true. And because it comes from an authority figure, we think that it is true. We think that they're telling us the truth, but they're not.
Today's scientists are not scientists in a true Pythagorean or Platonic sense. What they are is mathematicians. And mathematicians, and I have nothing against math, it's a religion. Okay? It does not believe in anything that cannot be quantified and counted. But of course, since everything is fields and fields are not particles and they can't be quantified, one of the most amazing stupidities that makes me laugh endlessly anytime I either hear it or it pops into my head is a wave-particle duality. Let's actually talk about how simple the double-slit experiment is here very quickly. And it is really simple. Everybody's like really confused. It's the same thing with the Schrodinger's cat. You know, is the cat really alive or dead? It's a stupid thought experiment. People actually crunch their brains on it's like, you know, a mind-bending question of like how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop. Wave-particle duality. Well, let's dissect that thing. 3 parts. Duality doesn't exist in nature. Duality means a inherent contradiction or an inherent duplicity within natura naturam. No, a wave is what something does. A wave is not a principle, it's not a subject, and it's not a noun as per hardcore metaphysics. There's no such thing as a wave, so a wave doesn't exist. Exactly the same thing as a shadow. Shadow is not a thing. Shadow doesn't exist. A shadow is a concept reification of the absence of light. That's what a shadow is by definition, but a shadow is not a thing itself. So we've eliminated out duality, we've eliminated out waves, and wave-particle duality, well, light is a coaxial circuit. Transverse electrical, magnetic, longitudinal pulse perturbations, rarefactions, and compressions is a coaxial circuit. There are no particles in light. The actual rarefactions and compressions, kind of like appearing and disappearing beads on a necklace, is what is mistaken for a light particle.
I want to talk a moment about reification and existence, because I think that that is partially what is happening here. In Marxism, reification is the process by which social relations, which is an interaction between two people, and interaction in any relationship between 2 or more individuals, are perceived as inherent attributes of the people involved in them, or attributes of some product of the relation, such as a traded commodity. This implies that objects are transformed into subjects and subjects are turned into objects, with the result that subjects are rendered passive and determined, while objects are rendered as the active determining factor. Hypostatization refers to an effect of reification, which results from supposing that whatever can be named or conceived abstractly must actually exist, an ontological and epistemological fallacy. I would agree with this, that this is what they're doing with quantum physics and the idea that particles are simultaneously waves, basically just saying that because we can conceive of it means that it's actually real in hardened physical reality. What I think is problematic here is in saying that simply because it is not hardened physical reality does not mean that it doesn't exist. What Ken Wheeler is saying with regards to reification in terms of the shadow or the wave is that people are taking the wave or the shadow and making it into a thing of itself. I'm not really sure that that's what's actually going on here, because I think people understand that a shadow is not a thing of itself, that a shadow is the effect that happens when something is blocking the light. So I don't think people think a shadow is a thing of itself, and I don't think people think a wave is a thing of itself. Now, to say that a wave doesn't exist because it is an action is wrong. You can see a wave, you can see that a wave exists. It is just not a thing of itself. It is not an object. So when you get into explaining what exist means, oddly enough, what Ken Wheeler is mocking is the quantification or the objectification of things, and that is what exist implies. It is having objective reality or being, but you can have something being and existing in this reality without any physical form. a thought is actually a thing. Thoughts become things. However, simply by saying that something exists doesn't make it exist. So anyway, you have, say, something such as a behavior. A behavior actually exists. An action actually exists, but they are not physical, tangible objects. You have a resulting reaction or a resulting observable behavior that is manifest as a result of something that something does. So you cannot, like, that is the physical manifestation of it, is the behavior manifests itself in the movement or in the consequence or in the action. So then it becomes a physical thing. And so, for example, if you're saying that an electron exists because I say that it does, because it is a concept, because I give it energy and attention, the only place that it exists is in that thought. It is the thought that exists. You cannot make an electron manifest. You can't erase the existence of a wave simply because it is an action. A wave does exist. So I think it's a point of differentiation in understanding what something actually is. You can absolutely break down every single thing in existence back to nothing because everything comes from nothing. But in doing so, you negate the existence of everything. So it's dangerous to say that everything that exists does not exist, because it does exist. We're having the experience right now. So you can't negate the experience. It's here. We're in it. We're experiencing it. We're living it. And so you have to accept the state of being, the state of existing. If not, where are you? What are you? You're nothing. You're not here. This is just nothing. It isn't nothing. You can't even say that it's nothing. You just can't. Everything is source in a different state. It is all reflections of self, reflections of source. And in negating that, something called reductionism is the practice of analyzing and describing a complex phenomenon in terms of phenomena that are held to represent a simpler, more fundamental level, especially when this is said to provide a sufficient explanation. So it's taking the complexity of the existence, boiling it down to nothingness. In doing that, what happens is nihilism. It's the rejection of all religious and moral principles and the belief that life is meaningless. It is the extreme skepticism, maintaining that nothing in the world has a real existence. And this leads to moral relativism. And now, there is a degree of truth in moral relativism, because what is good for me may not be good for you. But that's not necessarily moral. But moral relativism is the view that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint, for instance, that of a culture or historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. But is it objectively wrong? So how do you determine that? In ethics is a set of moral principles that govern a person's behavior, the conducting of an activity. Principles, ideals, virtues, but basically it's the difference between right and wrong. And a right and wrong you could also liken to the difference between good and evil. There seem to be fundamental laws of the universe, fundamental laws in how it operates in a physical sense, and that in turn reflects in a moral sense this positive, negative, this balance between blue shift, red shift. And in that understanding, there is a balance between virtues and vices, or virtues and sins, that has to be dealt with, that we have to confront, and we have to examine, and we have to understand, and we have to live by. It's a code we have to live by. We have to be careful that we don't minimize things to nothing, that we don't negate the existence of something simply because we come from the zero or the source. And we're not doing it in favor of our own justifications in terms of moral relativism, what's going on here is this sort of idea of postmodernistic philosophy or postmodernist thinking is holding liberal views, believing in equality for all in spite of race, sexual preference, class, or creed. And of course they believe no one should impose their views of right and wrong on others, so there isn't one right way to live. I mean, I can see both sides of this, but I do think that we need to understand the fundamental laws of the universe is that you have to live in harmony with the universe. You have to live in harmony with everything that exists. The argument that things are just aspects of one is true, but you cannot negate the aspects in favor of the one. So in this final section, I want to talk a bit about the idea of going to one, the singularity, and middle pillar ritual, and what they're wanting us to do versus what we actually have to do. When they tell us that we are one and that we need to all go back to one, what is actually happening here is that they are trying to implement the idea of oneness and unity on Earth, which is not possible in a place of duality. What we really need to do is behave in a way that is harmonious with Mother Nature, with the reality that we live in, because we are individual and connected, and we need to celebrate our individuality. Our individuality is what makes us unique, what makes us important, what makes us an integral part of this universe, because our unique perspective is what adds to this creation. You are the only person who can see reality the way that you see it. And so your individualness is God's gift to you and God's gift to the universe, because there's nobody else like you. And that needs to be celebrated. That needs to be identified and given importance and significance. We're not all the same. We all stem from the zero. We all stem from nothingness, no thingness. But that doesn't mean that we are all the same, because we are fragmented pieces of source. Because our experience matters. Our experience in how we interpret the world and reality in our personal life and our adventure here, our journey here matters, because it contributes to the whole. And to negate that, to push it aside and say that it is meaningless and nothing, not only negates you, but it negates the existence of the universe and negates God and God's creation. It's who we are, it's what we are. But we are not experiencing this as the whole. We're experiencing it as a fragment of the whole. So you can't negate that. You can't say that that doesn't happen and it doesn't exist.
And so the Taoists teach about our uniqueness, about honoring your uniqueness and your intention for your journey. Yeah. And that doesn't make you better than a worm or a worm better than you, because a worm can do things that you can't do and you can do things a worm can't do. So we all have a uniqueness, and the Taoist teaching is to identify your uniqueness, identify your mission, your purpose on this life journey that you're on as part of the great oneness.
The way we've been living is wrong, and it's because it's imbalanced, because it's male dominated, and it's been done like this on purpose by the people who are in power, the people we allowed to be in power. And we need to balance things. We need to get back to harmony.
Right? In oneness there is safety, there is security, there is community. We are not fighting with each other. We are intelligently working with each other. There is community there. And when push comes to shove, when things get tough, do we resort back to the animal nature, to that primitive drive, or do we actually do we actually come to feel oneness on a level where it continues to be acting out even when it gets difficult? And that's when we become spiritually mature. This has to be explored to me. If it is not explored, we will, well, look around. Divisiveness is running the world. Conflict is running the world. Division is running the world. It's happening all over the place. All the governments are founded on it. In the U.S., we just had somebody come to power who unapologetically promoted it. This is the model our world is working under. And if we don't mature spiritually and come to the place where we find oneness to be not just a nice idea, but a reality that can be lived, an effective tool for organizing all of humanity for the future, well, this is what we're going to get.
What potentially is going on here is the singularity is their AI transhumanistic perspective on how we ought to be living, and it is taking this idea of acknowledging the source within us and acknowledging our connectedness and taking it to a technological level. It's pushing it in the wrong direction. And this technological singularity, or simply the singularity, is a hypothetical future point in time at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unforeseeable changes to human civilization. And some people have said that the singularity has already happened. Basically, the singularity is transhumanism, and what the elites, the powers that be, the controllers, the techno-evils, what they are doing is they are trying to create heaven on earth. They're trying to replicate as above, so below, and they're doing it all wrong. We stem from the all, we stem from source, but we are not just one thing. We are individual things within the one thing. Abrahamism is all about we side with the good, and everyone who is not with us is against us, and we have to eliminate the opposition. We have to destroy evil. But it's not possible. You cannot destroy the opposite of one half of a magnet, because as you divide a magnet, you just create more polar opposites. And so splitting a magnet in half doesn't separate the north from the south. It just creates two magnets, both with their own polarized north and south. So if you're going to, eliminate evil to this person is evil. And so they're going to destroy this person because they're evil. And then everything will be good. Okay? So then that makes this magnet this much smaller. And this evil is over here now. And then they destroy that. And so evil is over here now. And then they destroy that. And evil is over here now. And it just keeps getting closer and closer and closer and closer until you become evil yourself. You can't get rid of it. You have to learn to live in harmony with it. In harmony with the existence of the opposite. And understand that we live in this dualistic or dual reality, and live in harmony with it, and understand that, yes, okay, this exists, but you can temper it. I mean, it is a very complex issue. So what are you supposed to do with evil? What are you supposed to do with it? What are you supposed to do with any polar opposite? Because of the spectrum, you can't get rid of it. So it's a little bit of a paradox. But that doesn't mean that you just stand idly by and allow somebody to treat you badly. It doesn't mean that you just stand idly by and allow people to take control of your country or take control of the world and say, it's all good, whatever, do what you want. Unless you're able to not participate in it. And you just say, listen, this is not right. I'm not going to participate. I'll be over there. Because you can't fight them with the same power.
So Buddhism has been encouraging us to detach ourselves, but not because of a capricious idea. It's because in that detachment there is happiness. When you become really detached from everything, there is peace.
Essentially, what we must do is what is called the middle pillar ritual, which is the path of the sun. Everything dictates that we are to follow the path of the sun. And in that sense, it is about going to one because the sun is one. The number of the sun is one. And that is sort of representative in the physical of what source is in the non-physical, which is why the sun is one, and the sun is the male, the mind, the consciousness, the projection of consciousness. So we have to follow the path of the sun. The path of the sun is through the zodiac, and the zodiac dictates our 12 labors. It is it's basically the journey that we have to follow in order to, for lack of a better word, ascend. And some will choose to follow it and some will choose not to. We all have our individual paths. We're not all on the same path. We're not all on the same point in our path, in our journey. And what this involves is, from what I understand, it involves turning our vices into virtues. Each planet is an archetype and represents both the duality of lust and chastity, glutton, abstinence, greed, temperance, sloth, diligence, anger, self-control, envy, kindness, pride, and humility. The alchemical process of turning our vices to virtues is what our task is here, from what I understand. That's what is representative of the two pillars with the sun in the middle. That's the true journey.
Now, we're not going to get too in depth with the tree of life at this point, other than to explain the law of polarity, but just know that it's the blueprint for the nature of reality. And you can see that polarity is built right into it. Except for the crown at the top, the pillars support the rest of the tree of life. See, you can't escape duality. It's built right into the very fabric of reality. Up, down, left, right, black, white, in, out, yes, no, male, female, positive, negative, on, off. And you're like, yeah, okay, I get that. Well, these seemingly opposite things are not separate at all. These things are one and the same, just with the opposite polarity. See, what's good for one person may be bad for another person. People are polarized. And you see this most evident in politics. Either on the left or the right. In religion, those Satanists are just as extreme as the fundamental Christians that they think they're rebelling against. They're one and the same. They're just opposite polarity. So how are people controlled through the law of polarity? They never focus on anything that unifies anybody. No, it's all division and polarization. Right now, it's gun control. See? And on those things, they never shut up about them. Those who are polarized are easily manipulated and controlled. All that's required is to introduce either an opposing force or a like force to move them, by repulsion or attraction. And one of the first things you learn in ritual magic is to do the middle pillar ritual. Well, that ritual is designed to balance those forces, to depolarize you, so that you're in the middle. so that you just don't automatically react to things.
In acknowledging only the duality, you detach yourself from the unity. In only acknowledging the unity, you detach yourself from the duality. We need to abide by the laws of the universe, and we need to understand our connectedness to it, yes. And in that sense, that would be going to the one. That would be going to the all, in understanding that we are all connected. And so you need to acknowledge the duality in the singularity, or the duality within the unity, as Plato says, because it's both. It's not one or the other.